So how does action director John McTiernan follow the success of Predator and Die Hard? Will you team him up with an immensely talented cast and an adaptation of a best-selling novel for the hunt for Red October? In November of 1984, the Soviet Union launches a technologically superior submarine, the Red October, under the command of Captain Marco Ramius, a revered figure in the Soviet Navy. Meanwhile, CIA analyst John Patrick Ryan meets with Admiral James Greer about suspicions of this mysterious new sub, as further expert analysis reveals a silent propulsion system that could launch a devastating stealth attack on an enemy target. Where the National Security Council knee-jerks to an impending act of war, Ryan comes to an epiphany believing that Ramius may be planning to defect on the one-year anniversary of his wife's death. Based on his intimate knowledge of the man, Ryan is put into the thick of things to get to the very heart of this escalating situation. Meanwhile, the Soviet Navy is unleashed to hunt down the Red October to prevent Ramius' proclaimed defection to the West, which is withheld from the Americans at great risk to everyone involved. With the Atlantic Ocean sprawled out as a game of chess, a single wrong move could launch two global superpowers into the depths of war, and only Jack Ryan has the perception and passionate belief in Ramius to potentially avert such dreadful ramifications. So The Hunt for Red October was the very first novel from author Tom Clancy, which was published in October of 1984 through a military publishing house, which was a kind of a very advantageous type of thing in terms of the depth of the research and the way he wrote the book, getting a lot of deep details into the technical accuracy of the operations of submarines and the procedures of the Navy and various other things, making it reportedly a kind of a long-winded sort of technical journal in a certain way with a narrative wrapped around. And when it was optioned out in February of 1985 by producer Mace Neufeld, he found it kind of difficult to get other studios to really kind of get an interest in it because they really couldn't wrap themselves around the novel itself, the story in it, probably because of the depth of the technical details and all that type of stuff, kind of maybe bogging it down a tad bit, as some people kind of reportedly say it was. But eventually he ended up getting some producers to really kind of look at it, some of the studio heads over at Paramount, to get interested in it, to start developing things. And it was early as Predator, the production on that film, that John McTiernan was kind of tapped into the process of this whole thing. So he went through Predator and Die Hard and stuff like that as this thing was getting developed by different screenwriters such as Larry Ferguson and some other people to really kind of boil it down to trying to find the story underneath all the details and a lot of the heavy stuff going on in the wider scope of the novel, and trying to find the deeper underlying story that would relate to an audience. And after they put together a first draft type of thing, and Jeremy McTiernan sat down with Ferguson and kind of read over the script, he found there wasn't anything he wanted to keep in there. So they kind of sat down and hashed the whole thing out to find the humanity in the story that broke it down and found the elements that really worked the strongest to make a very compelling narrative for this whole film. And the whole thing just went off in a very interesting type of way to really get a lot of fantastic people involved in this thing, such as cinematographer Jan de Bont, who he just worked with on Die Hard to amazing effect, and all these other fantastic people that are involved in this whole film, from Industrial Light and Magic doing a lot of the visual effects in the film, and all these other wonderful people, including Basil Polidorus doing the score for this film, who had done RoboCop and Conan the Barbarian before that. So there's a lot of talent building up this thing as it was kind of getting formed up towards production, all these different things, and especially after now McTiernan's got two major, really blockbuster successes that are commercially and critically well received for the most part. It's getting a lot of good traction for his career and getting him up on that tier to make sure that he is a very solid choice to be the director of this film and have that move forward at Paramount to get a $30 million budget on this whole film. And eventually released on March 2nd of 1990, grossed over $200 million at the box office, making about 6.5 times its production budget, making it a major success, one of the first successes of the 1990s, and just, again, solidifying so much John McTiernan was one of the best action directors of this era. I just think everything that McTiernan brings to the quality of this film is absolutely exceptional. The whole film has so many different characters, so many progressions of the plots, and different avenues that the plot is kind of having different sort of parallel things and converging elements going on in different places. It's all very concise. It all comes together so clearly to the audience. Nothing gets jumbled. Nothing's there that doesn't need to be there. He cuts out all the little extraneous things that you could possibly have in there and makes it very clear to the audience where the progression of the plot is going through all these different perspectives you have. The stuff with the Russians, the stuff with Ramius, all the stuff that Jack Ryan is doing in the film, all the stuff that the U.S. Navy and the CIA are kind of dealing with. All these perspectives on the situation are clearly established, and you follow them very easily throughout the entire course of the movie. He's such a very clean director, that type of way, to just make sure that you understand every single element that is being told in the story, but maintain an energy in the film, maintain a momentum in the film, keep the film moving forward. It never sags down, it never gets dull, it never has a moment where it feels kind of waiting for something to happen. There's always something progressing in the story, whether it's a character dynamic, a character arc, various different things are the threatening elements of the film, the tension, the suspense, the danger of the whole thing. There's such a progression and such a energy the film does have. Even in the quieter moments, it still has something going on that just feels very, again, captivating to an audience. It's such a phenomenal thriller in that type of way, where it captures all these elements with atmosphere and suspense and character dynamics and humanity as well, and just the political dangers going on and the sort of chess game that's being played in terms of what the Russians are willing to divulge to the Americans, all these little things, how they're trying to move the pieces around on the board in different places, just how the film has these different stages, these different phases of what the danger is, what the threat that you're building up towards, because first off, you don't know exactly what Ramius' intentions are. Once you start understanding a little bit more about the character, you add in another threat. You get the whole thing with the Russians unleashing their fleet into the Atlantic Ocean, and you see the Americans kind of getting worried about that type of stuff. And you have all these little things about how the naval commanders in the U.S. are having these trepidations about the entire situation, how they're reading the situation, how their government is kind of telling them this is what we believe is going to be happening. So there's always a threat, there's always a danger somewhere that keeps moving forward. They never have a point in the film where it gets too dissolved in a certain way. They always have a new element kind of coming in there to build on what you already have here and add a new element to make the film continually suspenseful and tension-filled while not exhausting the audience. And that rising tension to this is so well highlighted in Yondaban's excellent cinematography in this whole film. I just love everything it does in this whole thing, because there's so many wonderful tricks employed in this whole thing. First up, all the submarine sets were constructed on gimbals, so you could have the realistic moving back and forth when the subs are turning or stuff like that. You could actually get the physical reality of gravity in those situations where all the actors in the scene are legitimately being pulled this way and tilting that way and all this type of stuff. It's not just camera tricks, it's the actual moving set in a certain way. So that's a brilliant type of thing. I'm sure it was very complicated to deal with, especially with the tight spaces and all that type of stuff, to work in those scenarios. But Daban is such an amazing cinematographer. He actually pulls it off exquisitely well. All the shots he gets off in this whole thing, it creates the atmosphere of the whole thing, the claustrophobic sense that you get in any type of really good submarine movie is absolutely present here. And it was such a pointed thing that is like, we're telling the story in between all these different submarines and things, sort of battleships, stuff like that. There has to be a visual way to distinguish one from another when you're cutting from, like, Ramius' submarine to the USS Dallas and the other Russian sub. You have to visually distinguish one from another. So generally, like, the USS Dallas is all red, and then Ramius' ship, the Red October, is actually blue, and then the one captained by Stellan Skarsgård is predominantly green interiors. So you just create these interesting visual motifs when they really had to, when you're cutting from one to another, to make sure that you could instantaneously understand which sub you're seeing actions being happening from. It's a wonderful type of thing. It's just so forward-thinking in such a smart way for a cinematographer to think how to construct that narrative, seeing how everything is going to be constructed in editing, how the audience is going to perceive these scenes to make it very clear and, again, concise to them by lighting it in these specific ways. So it's a wonderful type of thing. And just like, again, you can tell this is absolutely from the team that brought you Die Hard. between McTiernan's direction and DeBont's just fantastically dynamic, just punchy cinematography. It all looks gorgeous. All the colors that they use, especially when you get up to the climax of the film and you got Jack Ryan going off at the bowels of the ship and everything, chasing the saboteur and all that type of stuff. It's gorgeous type of stuff. Just pops right off the screen. Just looks absolutely phenomenal. All the interesting angles that are put together and the compositions. These two just work off so exquisitely well together. Just have this just in-line, cohesive vision to really kind of capture these interesting shots with how there's always a certain sense of movement. Even with the visual effects, McTiernan was very specific about making sure there was some kind of movement at almost any point in time. Jan de Bont's one of the goddamn best cinematographers ever out there. He had just worked on Ridley Scott's Black Rain, which looked like an incredible looking movie, and ended up going on directing films like Speed and Twister. So the guy moved on, progressed in his career, and put together fantastic looking films and wonderfully directed films as well. So one of the best of all time, absolutely positively in team with McTiernan. Absolute success every goddamn time, in my opinion. But so much of the success of this movie is so much with this just insane cast you have in this film. The talent you have attached to this film. Some people who had not even been totally sort of discovered in a certain way. Guys like Courtney B. Vance, who's gone on to an incredible career after this, had this one part in the whole film as the sort of the guy who's listening on the radar and all that type of stuff to pinpoint all the different things in the deep sea and kind of working the sonar, all that type of stuff. He put together a great performance here where it's like he's always on point. He's always got a memorable type of quality to him throughout the entire film, but never steals anything from anyone. He always complements the dynamics and the chemistry of everything else going on in the scene, but he's got so much charisma and so much things going for him. This guy had the magic early on. He's continued to go on so strongly for the last 30 years in his career, making absolutely fantastic work for himself. But definitely you got to talk about Sean Connery, who's one of these wonderful actors who just come off stuff like The Untouchables, which got him a lot of acclaim. He'd done a whole bunch of really good stuff throughout the 80s, and this is like, yeah, Sean Connery getting on this film. After they had another guy in mind for it, but fell through, they got like Sean Connery right when he was about to take like a vacation or something like that. Eventually got him attached to the whole film, which just kind of just crystallized the entire energy of the film, the entire credibility, the entire interest of so many people involved with this movie. He's got so much of a commanding, powerful presence on screen, just has all these wonderful nuances to his performance in this film as Marco Ramius. Even though Connery's not really much of a linguist, even John McTiernan himself had kind of admitted that on the film's commentary track, that we're not really going to focus on making very consistent, accurate accents, because you got guys like Sean Connery, who's Scottish, you got Tim Curry, who's British, you got Sam Neill, who's got probably one of the most consistent but not terribly consistent accents, who's from New Zealand. So there's a lot of guys like they're not even trying really to do that, and some guys who are kind of trying but not sticking totally consistently faithful to it. So McTiernan wasn't concerned about that. He was concerned about the quality of the performances, how the emotion comes off on screen, how the characters interest the audience, all that type of stuff. And Connery's so goddamn good. It definitely deserves that top billing on the film, even though in retrospect is the start of a Jack Ryan franchise, stuff like that. Connery's the big star in this whole film. The entire story is centered around his character, and if you're not invested in what the character of Marco Ramius is doing in this film, the film doesn't hold up. No matter how many other great actors are in it, if you don't have this centerpiece of him as Ramius, putting this phenomenal performance, I feel, it doesn't hold up. And he does so many great things that you just feel the conflict and trepidation with the character early on when he has to kill the political officer on board the Red October, because if this guy is still involved with things as he's kind of going off book and everything from their orders, there's going to be just insurmountable mutiny and stuff like that going on, just like it's not going to work. He has to kill this guy, and you can see immediately he regrets having to do it. I like these little moments where he just has this trepidation about the situation, but the consequences of him not doing what he's going to do is even more reprehensible to him, because the whole thing of just like when he says later on in the film that once he saw the blueprints for this sub that can sneak up undetected, silent as hell, stealth, and get right up on the coast of someplace and unleash a barrage of missiles. This is a war waiting to happen through this machine that they're barreling through the sea with. He knew he had to do something about it, and knew this was a path that he had to follow on, regardless of any little things that he has to carry around with him. It just creates a fantastic character that Connery is just so committed to, adding all these little senses of, I just love how he commands the Red October. That ship, how he has this sense of confidence all the time. When he's around the full crew, he does not waver in his confidence, and that's a wonderful sign of how Connery puts together a character to make sure that his stature as the authority figure, the captain of this vessel, maintains that integrity all the way through, and very much knows exactly what he's doing in every single situation. Every time someone questions what he's doing, he's always proven right. And I like how so much of that just works out so very well towards the ends of how Connery portrays all these elements, the nuances of the character, all these little things when he gets a little bit more into his own quarters, and you can see that conversation he has with Sam Neill's character, the executive officer on the vessel, and just have this rapport between them and seeing what kind of drives them to this defection that they're going forward and all that type of stuff. So everything he does is right on the top level. Some of the best stuff I've ever seen him do. He's absolutely fantastic in this whole film. And of course, the actor originating the role of Jack Ryan here is Alec Baldwin, and he was a real up-and-coming star at this point in time, but this film really just nailed him so much as a potential leading man in Hollywood. And of course, we've had a lot of other actors step into the role over the years, different people in different films and now in Amazon series. And it's just like, I like so much what Alec Baldwin just generally brings to the screen. It just adds so much to the passion of this character and the going forward in the film, because I just love the entire magneticism he has on screen, just like the way he's able to just make the audience lean further into the story, draw them further in, how he presents himself, how he delivers lines of dialogue with such a sharp intensity in certain points in time, just like he has such a thing on screen that's so electric that just kind of pierces out of you, just the same as his piercing blue eyes, just like they jump right out at you and just kind of pull you into whatever he's doing on screen. I like so much how he just uses that to its advantage with the character of Ryan here, because he's got such a passion about the character of Ramis here, that he's got such a dedicated, committed quality about his belief in what Ramis' intentions are here, because he's so well versed in the man. He's met him before and has such a perceptive intelligence about how the entire situation is kind of developing as it goes along. And there's all these little things where just like, you risk these gambles in certain situations. They're so dead set certain that what he believes is what is the truth of the situation, that he's willing to risk all these different little things, dropping down into the USS Dallas from the helicopter into the ocean, and all these little things, all these little gambles in this situation where he's up against Scott Glenn's character later on in the film, and having this sort of just wonderful moment in this type of scene that they have together there, just this electricity just sparking up between these intense glares they have going on when they're kind of like having this battle of wits in a certain way. Just like, I love how this entire story makes the character of Jack Ryan such a force moving forward, that he's the guy that everyone doubts because he's not a seasoned military officer, even though he had the Marine background in the film, which does kind of add in a little bit to the entire scenario here. But I like how that everyone's just kind of like, you're just an analyst. A guy who sits at a desk in an office somewhere. You're not out here in the real world experiencing these things, dealing with these situations. Everyone kind of discounts him a little bit, but he has enough forward momentum, forward force to kind of be confident what he believes. That it has enough in him to really kind of push the story forward and keep the audience hooked into his character as very relatable, very likable. I like so much. You got the family dynamic established early on in the film with Gates McFadden from Star Trek The Next Generation as the original Kathy Ryan here, who gets one scene in the film and is never seen again in the franchise. And Anne Archer would go on and play her in the next film and the next two films and all that type of stuff. But I like how you build out the family dynamic. You got all the little scenes there with James Earl Jones as Admiral Greer, and have these relatable talks between the two characters. You just have this warm sense between them to kind of build that character up and get the intelligence of the character tuned into the audience. All these little things, he just nails so much. It's just like, again, how much Connery is very vital to the film, absolutely positively central to the progression and the hook of the entire story. But you have to have that character portrayed by Alec Baldwin, and have that kind of intensity that he has in the film, and all these little things. Even if he gets him a lot deeper situation than he ever intended to from the beginning, I like how the character remains committed, and he's able to push that forward and do it because there's such big things on the line here, that the scope of war hovering over everyone's head if things go wrong. I love how that all encapsulates within his performance, and I think Baldwin did an amazing performance here, and obviously positively, probably one of his best performances his entire career here, one of the best he's ever done. And it's very interesting how Scott Glenn's performance actually came to be in this whole film, because, taking an offer to go on a naval vessel for a couple of days just to get the sense of the feel and function and everything like that, and became very intrigued by the actual commander of the vessel, Commander Thomas Fargo, ended up being an admiral later on, and very much a friend of Scott Glenn's over time. He was just very captivated by how he just had this sort of very restrained way of handling the situations on the ship. He never raised his voice, he just handled everything in a very calm and collected type of manner. And so Scott Glenn decided, well, this guy just works so well for what I want to do with this character that I'm just going to use his personality and put it into this character who's in the script. And as much as that's just like transplanting one thing to another, it still took Scott Glenn's talent, his immense talent, to make that captivating on screen, because he's such an intense actor, and so just like he has such a gravitas on screen that just pulls your attention into the film, like so many other performances here. But I just like so much that he's such an economical character. He's so concise and so decisive about everything he does. There's no wasted motion. There's no wasted words in what he puts out on screen. Again, it works with the tautness of the film, the tension that you have going on when you have these certain sequences, like you've got that wonderful scene between him and Ryan, where they're kind of like battling back and forth in this game of wits and stuff like that. And it's like he's listening to what Ryan has to say in this moment about Rams's potential intentions, but he's still putting out orders to his crew about continuing on this sort of search and destroy mission that they've been given. I like that. It just creates so much drama in the scene that just keeps everything wrapped up nice and tight. I even love Stellan Skarsgård as this other Russian captain. It's like, man, he just feels like he's so soaked into the whole thing. It's like this guy who is like this protege of Ramius, now he's sent to kill him. He's like, I just love the entire mood on that ship, man. There's a certain sinister kind of ominous feel going on to the whole thing. And Sam Neill just doing, again, one of these great actors just you always rely upon to really just do some really good stuff. I like him so much as the second in command on Ramius' Red October. He does so much really good stuff. Just like I love the whole thing about will they allow me to live in Montana, and just the little moments and they kind of come back forward when he gets shot later on and dies. Like, I wish I could have seen Montana. Something like that. It's like little things. I just like how they have that sort of parody between the two characters. They're kind of in it together. It's like I love how they write the character that Sam Neill portrays here, that he never questions Ramius and from the other crew. If he's going to say anything, it's going to be behind closed doors between just the two of them. It's a real good candor between them. It's like, I like that chemistry between the two actors and that camaraderie they have, this sort of thing they have going on between themselves about the defection and everything like that. Again, like I said, Courtney B. Vance, wonderful type of stuff. James Earl Jones as Admiral Greer again, fantastic actor, adds so much to this whole thing. He'd be one of the returning actors to the Harrison Ford era of the Jack Ryan films. Fred Dalton Thompson, who would just about be in Die Hard 2 the same year. He was a U.S. Senator throughout his entire acting career and appearing on Law & Order as the District Attorney for several seasons. Passed away a couple of years ago, but one of his most recent performances was in Scott Derrickson's Sinister, and he did a fantastic job. Always did a really solid, even-tempered, sort of commanding sort of performance. He was a really good actor, too, so this film is just bursting with talent all over the place. Tim Curry, like I said, he's the doctor in the Red October, and again, another guy not even trying a Russian accent. He's just British the entire film, but Tim Curry, always good stuff whenever you get to have him, just like all this stuff, just every scene that has like a fantastic actor in it. Nobody puts in a weak performance. Everyone is right on the top levels of everything they can deliver in this whole film. And as I touched on earlier, the entire score for the film was composed by Basil Poledouris, who just absolutely excelled in these big, powerful, verbose type of scores. And it works so well in this whole film. Just early on, from the opening credits, where you got that big Russian choral type of stuff, kind of very prideful feeling that you have when you got all this stuff later on in the whole film where the entire crew, the Red October, just start bellowing out the entire Russian national anthem. It just has that feeling, that kind of big sort of puffed out chest type of feeling and all that type of stuff, but it puts got so many interesting type of things in this whole film, just like he has all the thrilling sort of very subtle type of things you get into the score with both orchestral and a little bit of electronic stuff there as well. So it's like he has this nice mix of different things, and he has a very pointed type of way of how he can move the thrilling aspects of the story in different directions as it starts to amp up and starts to get into the more sort of tension-filled type of stuff you have going on. All these different things really just excel so much on the top levels, and if you are a fan of his work, this thing did have an Intrado release several years ago that is probably very costly to hunt down now, but there's kind of a regular soundtrack release that's always been out there. But if you're definitely a fan of Basil Poledouris' stuff, this is an absolute get for you for your collection of stuff. Visual effects in the film are very interesting because there is an element here in 1990, just getting pretty much just like right after the end of 1989, off the heels of like The Abyss. You've got a few digital effects in this film. They didn't use as much as John McTiernan kind of thought they'd be able to do because they figured they could just do everything with the computer right now. But Ireland was like, so hold on, we can't do all that much with it at this point in time. We can't do that type of workload. So you've still got the subs being used as models in this whole thing, being shot at like high frame rates with all this fog around them to kind of simulate the look of underwater photography. Done very, very well. They got all this interesting stuff where they had to get so close to the subs, the models of the subs, they had to use like a mirror to kind of reflect it back and everything because they couldn't get the camera quite that close. So all these little kind of tricks they're kind of used from the physical, practical end of it. And a few digital things where they had to do something with stuff like the missiles, and a few things where they kind of had to do like the underwater, the water waking around the engines and stuff like that of the subs and everything like that. So those shots don't quite hold up as well. John McTiernan kind of calls them primitive digital effects, and Abyss and then Terminator 2 and stuff like that, where we won't get to Jurassic Park, where that really felt like it really was just kind of breaking through, and then people just abused the living shit out of it. But this one kind of used it a little bit more strategically and kind of for the better of it, because even like the whole green screen scene at the end of the film where you just got Ryan and Ramius there kind of just going down the river and everything in Maine and going to the dry docks, like, this composite doesn't look terribly great. Probably because they kind of kept the background in focus for the plate and kept the actors in focus as well. So it's like it looks kind of weird because the focus is not creating a proper depth of field, stuff like that, and stuff like that. So it's like there's little nagging things with some of the stuff in the film in terms of effects wise, but this whole film just comes together on a brilliant regard because celebrating 30 years, this film holds up immaculately. In my opinion, this film is incredible. I've loved this film more and more every time I've revisited it. I love it. And of course, we got a lot more Jack Ryan after this film because they did go ahead and do Patriot Games in 1982, but at the time, Alec Baldwin could not resolve his schedule to be available to return to the role of Jack Ryan, so they got Harrison Ford, one of the biggest movie stars in the world at the time, and put together a really solid action thriller with that whole film. Director Philip Noyce does a really fantastic job, even though they did a lot of changes from the source material, and Tom Clancy kind of disowned the film because of that. But I think it's a really satisfying, solid action thriller. 1994 they did Clear and Present Danger, also with Harrison Ford and Philip Noyce as director. And it's a film that's still very good, but I find it kind of very talky in the first half of it. It really kind of takes a long time to really build up to enough thrilling elements to really kind of compel my attention. But once it does, it is very satisfying. But it's just very interesting that all three of these first three Jack Ryan films all grossed somewhere in the range of $200 million apiece. So a very consistent, very solid franchise for Paramount Pictures to keep going forward with. But after Clear and Present Danger, Harrison Ford, Philip Noyce really could not agree on a very solid script to progress into yet another film. So I think it was about 2002 they put out The Sum of All Fears, which is basically a complete reboot with Ben Affleck in the role of Jack Ryan. And I try to go back to it, and just like it doesn't compel my attention as much as the first three films at all. It's just a very different style of film. Phil Alden Robinson, who did Sneakers, and Field of Dreams takes on the helm of the whole thing, and when I've tried to go back to it, it just doesn't really kind of grasp my attention as much as I thought it would when I did my retrospective of the entire franchise back in 2014. Just one that kind of slips away and doesn't really kind of captivate my attention as much. Then we had the Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit film in 2014, where we had Chris Pine and another reboot that it feels like it's basically just kind of a forgettable action film. Just like, it's okay, it's nothing great, it's nothing terrible, just like, it's just kind of there. And like Sum of All Fears really wasn't enough to get enough traction at the box office or audience desire to really kind of move forward on yet another progression of the theatrical franchise. But we've got an Amazon Prime series now starring John Krasinski, who's in a second season, so I've not watched it. But from the looks of the trailers, it looks like a very good, well-produced series with still a lot of traits recognizable of the Jack Ryan character, so looks like it's doing very well. And if anyone watching this video has watched that Amazon Prime series, I'd very much like to hear your thoughts about that. Anything more I can't say, guys, but I'd like to hear what you guys have to say about this film, and even just the entire franchise in general. So what are the... there are certain films like Sum of All Fears or Shadow Recruit that just feel like they're kind of forgettable or don't really kind of get you going, or various different things. If you don't think Patriot Games is quite as good as I feel or stuff like that, get your kind of discourse going and just feel out how the franchise lays for you in terms of rankings if you want to. So thanks so much, guys. There's always the Patreon to really kind of support things around here. You're going to get stuff early and a whole bunch of other good stuff hopefully soon. So I should be posting some other good stuff very shortly up there as little extras, but hopefully you guys will enjoy what I have here and hit the like button, subscribe, all that wonderful stuff, and share links around everywhere you go. I deeply appreciate that in the very least, guys. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.